Well, hi friends. It's good to be with you again on this Thursday afternoon. I think we're on live and we're up and running. Yep, there we go. It's good to be with you again today and to share with you some thoughts from the scriptures and just by way of truth that we can anchor our lives in. I'm just trying to figure out which one of these Facebook elements I'm supposed to tap into. I never seem to be able to remember or figure out exactly which one it is. Oh, anyway, we'll keep going. It's good to be with you on this Thursday afternoon and sharing together in the scriptures and just a little bit of encouragement for you from the scriptures. Before we do that, though, I just want to bring to your attention just a couple of matters within the context of the EMMC for you to be aware of. First of all, this weekend is the EMMC gathering in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Now, because of the COVID issues surrounding our world today, the gathering is going to be held virtually. There will be some people in Saskatchewan at the gathering. However, for us in Manitoba, because of travel issues and COVID issues, we have the privilege of joining in by way of live stream and by virtual ability. So if you're interested in that, please go to the emmc.ca website, and when you go to that website, you'll be able to find all of the links, all of the move-in elements of that gathering, and so you can log in and away you go. So just remember that this weekend is the EMMC gathering in Saskatoon, and you can join that by live stream, by virtually on your home computer. So prayerfully you will enjoy that. We also, as a congregation, want to express our condolences to Esther Fair and to her children. Esther and her husband Benny are a missionary couple working in Bolivia, and we received the sad news this morning that Benny passed away in Bolivia around midnight Bolivia time. And so he passed away, and so the Fairs led the MEM radio ministry in Bolivia, and they also worked with the youth. And so we just ask that you remember Esther and her family as they mourn and grieve the loss of Benny, and as they remember fondly his ministry and his place in their life, and all of those things that come with that. Also pray for the MEM team as they grieve the loss of a ministry colleague and a friend. Of course, death is never an easy time for anybody, and tremendous loss there. And so please remember Esther and her family as they grieve together. I want to spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon chatting about an Old Testament passage, which is, of course, very, very familiar to many, many people. In fact, it may be very familiar to you as well. The passage I have in mind comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, which simply says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding, but in all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." You know, I've always been fascinated by this passage because it communicates something critically important to us, because in it God speaks wisdom that he's designed for us to be able to find success in life. I'm sure that in your moving through life, one of the things that you've tried to do is to make a success of your life. And we'll define and talk about that in just a moment, but I'm sure that's a goal that many of us have, if not all of us have. We want to be a success in life. But the question is, what does that success look like? Humanly, we often define success in life by things like, for example, the size of one's bank account, or their social stature and position in life, or the social circles in which one moves, or even the job title that one carries. Now, these are fairly standard definitions of success that we sort of look to. In fact, students might define success by their GPA or their grade point average, or the scholarships that they receive. The point is that we tend to define and measure much of what we call success by external standards. The question is for us this afternoon, how does God measure success? As I think about what I read in the scriptures, he seems to have a very different definition and standard of measure than do we. His measure involves what we're like internally, spiritually, rather than externally and materially. The very familiar story of Samuel's anointing of David as God's human king to replace King Saul gives us some insight into the kind of standard that God uses to measure success. I want you to listen to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 6 and 7. When they, that is Jesse and his sons, entered to the place where they were going to talk to Samuel, and Samuel would anoint the king that God pointed out. When they, Jesse and his sons, entered, he, that is Samuel, looked at Eliab, this is one of Jesse's sons, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. So when Samuel looked at Eliab, maybe he was the first one that Samuel saw, but when Samuel looked at Eliab, he thought to himself, now this is the one who will be the king over Israel. But listen, but the Lord said to Samuel, don't look at his appearance or at the height of his stature. Those would be the external kind of standards that we look to find perhaps successful people, someone that's big and strong and that sort of thing. But God says, don't look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. In other words, Eliab was not the one that God was looking for to lead Israel. For God sees not as a man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so you can tell right there from what Samuel says in 1 Samuel 16, 6 and 7, that God has a very different standard of measure concerning success than do we. And he wants us to be very aware of that. Now, I want to remind us that Samuel was ready to anoint Eliab as Israel's king, but God obviously sees what we do not and often cannot see. His definition of success, his standard of measure, includes what we do not often consider as important. We're limited to seeing the external, but obviously, according to 1 Samuel, God sees something much deeper. He sees the heart. He defines success not by what we've achieved. He's more focused on how we gain our success. And there's quite a difference between those two. We often, as I said before, we often peg our measure of success on what a person achieves. And we're not nearly as interested in how they achieve that success. Well, God is one who is very interested in how we achieve success. Not just that we achieve success, but how do we do it? So he defines success not by what we've achieved. He's more focused on how we gain our success. For example, we might look at a person who's achieved great heights of success by their wealth and their position of life, and we might be tempted to say to ourselves, look what they've achieved. Their success is obvious. In fact, we may even tout their success, their level of success, as something to pursue so that we can have the same success in life. It's so easy for us to look at somebody else and what they're doing and assume that they are successful, and they might be according to those external standards. But the question is, how did they arrive or achieve the success that we're looking at? Like I said before, we measure success by the visible material end product of what's been achieved. But we can't see how they've achieved their success. Was it achieved by stepping on others? Was their success achieved by cheating? Was their success achieved by questionable moral practices? Very often, those are the things that we don't see and can't see and know nothing about. And yet, what we see is that person who to us looks quite successful. But those questions of how they achieved their success, these are the things that are often hidden from us. But this is what God sees, and this is what he's concerned about. He's concerned about the kind of person that we become in the process of achieving success in life. This is a question of the quality of our success. Now, those external standards, we'll talk about those as the quantity of our success. But what God looks at is the quality of our success, the kind of person that we become in the process of living. And that's, I think, why God gives us the Proverbs. To God, life is about far more than simply the quantity of our success. To him, life is ultimately about the quality of success, the kind of people we become, the character that we bring to life. And to achieve that kind of quality, God's looking for, it requires a certain wisdom to be able to do that. And it requires, quite frankly, God's wisdom, I think. And so in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 6, God tells us what he's after. Remember the passage that we started out with. Do not lean on your own understanding, of course. In all your ways, trust the Lord with all of your heart, right? Trust the Lord with all of your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. In all of your ways, acknowledge him. And here's the goal that God has for us. He will make your path straight. Now, I've always been curious, what does that mean, a straight path? Well, obviously that's the goal, and the way we develop that ability to walk this straight path is by making three crucial or critical choices along the way. Number one, by trusting in the Lord with all of our heart. Number two, by not leaning on our own understanding. And number three, by acknowledging God in all of our ways. And what Solomon tells us in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is that if we're willing to do that, he will make our path straight. Now, as I said, what does that mean to walk a straight path? Well, by path in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 6, Solomon is simply referring to the direction that one's life takes. You see, we're all walking on a path. We're all on a path in life, going in a certain direction. And we've chosen that path for many different reasons. Your reasons are different than my reasons, but we all have our reasons for going down the path that we're going. And along the way, we're making decisions about how to achieve our perceived goal to gain success. God's concern in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 involves the quality, the kind of decisions we make along our life's path to achieve our goals and to gain our success. Well, let me give you an example. Let's say you want to retire at a young age with a healthy bank account. Now, there's nothing wrong with that goal. That's a great goal to have in life, to be able to retire early, to enjoy many years of retirement, and to do it in such a way so that you have the ability to afford those things in life to help you to enjoy that retirement all the more. And so it's a good goal. But the question is, how will you achieve that goal? You'll need to set a path or a direction to get there, of course, and you'll need to make decisions along the way. And inevitably, some of those decisions are going to include and involve moral, ethical choices between doing the wrong thing and doing the right thing. For example, do you take morally or ethically questionable shortcuts along the way that might, say, cheat someone else or use them unfairly to gain your own ends? When I think about this very specifically in terms of an example, I think of a man in the US by the name of Bernie Madoff. Here's a man who obviously had an incredible goal of fabulous wealth and living a very wealthy lifestyle, and he certainly did that. And if you looked at Bernie Madoff's life from the outside, by all of the trappings that he achieved in life, you would say this man is a roaring success. Unfortunately, what many people didn't find out until much later on was that Bernie Madoff used people and their money to create his wealth. He created a pyramid scheme that cheated them out of their life savings in order for him to find success in his life. And so that's what I mean by those moral, ethical questions that you'll be posed with along your path in life to find success. It may not be in the area of money, it might be in another area, but we'll always be challenged with ethical, moral choices along the way. And we have to make sure that we're doing things the right way and not the wrong way, because that's what God wants for us. See, God's concern is that we walk a straight path. That is, one that is morally and ethically upright, a path that reflects the knowledge that we're created in his image and that we carry his priority in all of our decisions along the path that our life is taking. In fact, a path that reflects the fact that one day we'll stand before him to give an account of our life. I'm always reminded of what the psalmist says in Psalm 90, particularly verses 10 to 12. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years, but their pride is but labor and sorrow. For soon it is gone and we fly away. So life is short. And so this question is asked, who understands the power of your anger, referring to God, and your fury according to the fear that is due you? So in the context of a brief life, David reminds us here that we need to keep in mind that God is alive and he is one to be feared. That is to be reverenced and to be understood both as very generous and gracious in his love, but also awful in his wrath. And so we need to remember that someday we'll stand before God to give an account of our life. And so verse 12 says, so teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. So with that in mind, David wants us to live wisely so that when we stand before God, we're able to give a good account of what we've done with our life and the path that our life has taken. Of course, the way we walk this straight path is by, of course, as I said before, trusting the Lord with all of our heart, not leaning on our own understanding, and acknowledging God in all our ways. Now, let's take it a step further. What do these 3 points mean? A key component of good Bible study method is to let the scriptures interpret itself. And you need to understand something about context. So what I'm saying here this afternoon is that many of us look at Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and that's a wonderful passage in and of itself. But that passage rests within a context. And that context is determined by the previous 2 chapters to chapter 3 of Proverbs. So what I want to do this afternoon is perhaps help you see a little more clearly what God is trying to get across in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 to us. So what I want to do this afternoon, just briefly, is read Proverbs chapter 1 and 2 with you and just simply follow what it says. And if you listen carefully, I think what you're going to hear is you're going to hear all of the elements of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 scattered throughout those first 2 chapters of Proverbs. And what I'm going to do is I made copies of Proverbs chapter 1 and 2 in a larger text font. And as I'm going to read chapter 1 and 2, I want you to listen carefully to the number of times Solomon references going down a path. It's kind of interesting. I didn't realize this until I had done the study myself, but what I discovered is that at least 10 times in the first 2 chapters, or I should say 9 times in the first 2 chapters of Proverbs, the idea of a path is referenced or mentioned outright. And it's really important because by the time you get to chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, you understand this business of walking a straight path. So let me begin by reading chapter 1 with you. If you have a Bible or your app open in front of you, please feel free to follow along. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation today, and I think it's very expressive in the way it deals with this text. So listen carefully. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, the king of Israel. And when it begins with 2 purpose statements. Their purpose, that is, the purpose of the Proverbs, is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. There's a second purpose statement. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives. I like that. The Proverbs are there to teach us how to live a disciplined and a successful life. And what does that contain? To help them to do what is right, what is just, and what is fair. What I want you to recognize in verse 3 of Proverbs 1 is that God's definition of success in life focuses on character. His concern is the kind of person we become. So when someone else might read successful lives, they might think, like I said, big bank accounts, social circles one moves in, to find success in that measure. But to Solomon, when he thinks about success in life and God's definition of success, he says to help them to do what is right or righteous, what is just or what looks like justice, and what looks like fairness. So those are the 3 principles that are to envelop the life of someone who is wise. And here's what the Proverbs do. These Proverbs in verse 4 will give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen to these Proverbs and become even wiser. And let those who understand receive guidance. By exploring the meaning of these Proverbs and parables, the words of the wise and their riddles. And then, of course, he makes this all-important statement. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So right there in verse 6, or verse 7, I should say, we have this bit of a dividing line. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge. In other words, the wise are guided by their fear of the Lord. Fools, however, despise wisdom and discipline. The wise and the fool both aim at finding success, but they take very different paths to get there than do the wise. And so in verse 8, we have this plea that begins, my child, listen to your father's correction. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. What you learn from them will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck. So as the Proverbs begin, they want us to put ourselves in the position of being a child, learning from mom and dad how to live wisely. And you see that happening all the time. I'm a parent, perhaps you're a parent, and you will know that as your children, as you raise your children, as your children grow up underneath you, what you want to do is you want to help them to learn to become wise people in life. Well, that's exactly what's happening here in Proverbs chapter 1. The proverb, Solomon wants us to take the position of a child who is learning from a parent how to live wisely. And here's the first example of how that comes about. My child, says Solomon, if sinners entice you, turn your back on them. Well, that's a loaded statement. What do you mean, Solomon, if sinners entice you? Well, Solomon takes the time in verses 11 to 19 to flesh that out. They may say, come and join us. Let's hide and kill someone. Just for fun, let's ambush the innocent. Let's swallow them alive. Like the grave, let's swallow them whole, like those who go down to the pit of death. So what I want you to remember here is that as the Proverbs begin to give us examples of what wisdom looks like as opposed to foolishness, it invites us to think of this example of someone enticing a child to follow them. And of course, their plan is to hide and to kill someone, to ambush someone, to take their life from them. Now, why are they doing that? Well, verses 13 and 14 tell us what their plan, this is the success they're looking for. Think of the great things we'll get. We'll fill our houses with all the stuff that we take. Come throw your lot in with us and we'll all share the loot. So if you can imagine, there's this group of sinners, and they're talking to this individual and they're saying, listen, throw your lot in with us. What we're planning is to ambush someone, overtake someone's life, move into the life of someone who's innocent, and we're going to take from them what belongs to them, and we're going to take it for ourselves. And of course, we're going to be successful because look at all of the stuff that we have. Don't you want to join us in our plan? Because we'll share the loot with you. Doesn't that sound like a wonderful plan? We're going to be successful, and because we're successful, you can share in our success. But as Solomon wisely says, if sinners entice you to this kind of success, turn your back on them. In fact, he says in verse 15, my child, don't go along with them. Stay far away. Now notice very carefully in verse 15, stay far away from their path. These sinners are going down a particular path in life. And Solomon says in this example, don't go near them. Don't follow their path in life. You go a different path. And here's the part that many don't see, but the child needs to understand. These sinners who are making this plan to find success their way down the path that they've chosen, they rush to commit evil deeds. They hurry to commit murder. If a bird sees a trap being set, it knows to stay away. But these people set an ambush for themselves. They're trying to get themselves killed. Such is the fate of all who are greedy for money. It robs them of life. The interesting thing here is that what the child can't see in the life of these sinners who are making this plan is that these sinners think they're successful, but really they're not. They're setting an ambush for themselves, and they're going to rob themselves of life because they're going to be held accountable for their plan and for their path and for everything that is involved in that example. And so you need to be very careful about which path in life you follow, because if you follow the path of these sinners, you're going to wind up in a lot of trouble that you had not planned for, but you need to be aware of. And so in chapter 1, verse 20, there's a call to wisdom. Wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries out in the public square. She calls to the crowds along the main street, to those gathered in the front of the city gate. How long, you simpletons, will you insist on being simple-minded? How long, you mockers, will you relish your mocking? How long, you fools, will you hate knowledge? Come and listen to my counsel. Here's the counsel to wisdom. I'll share my heart with you. I'll make you wise. The unfortunate thing is that wisdom really sometimes goes very unheeded. And we find that in verses 24 and following. I called to you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice. You rejected the correction that I offered. And of course, then come the consequences of rejecting that wisdom that this child should have listened to in the very beginning. So I will laugh when you're in trouble. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster engulfs you like a cyclone, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. For when they cry for help, I will not answer. And though they anxiously search for me, they will not find me. Why? For they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. What Solomon is trying to point out to us is that down every path in life, there is going to come this time where there's a reckoning and accounting of that path. And of course, at some point, these sinners will probably find out that the path they're going down is absolutely wrong, and they're going to try to seek wisdom to try to correct it. The unfortunate problem is, because they didn't find it in the very beginning when they should have, they're now suffering the consequences of their wrong path. And unfortunately, there's no wisdom to be found on it, and those consequences can be deadly. Let's go back to verse 29. For they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They rejected my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. Therefore they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way. There's another path word. They must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way. Mark that. Choking on their own schemes, for simpletons turn away from me to death. Fools are destroyed by their own complacency. But all who listen to me will live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So even in chapter 1, you've got two mentions of going down a particular path in life, and already there you can begin to see the contrast between a straight path and a path that is marked by crookedness, by evil, by plans that are unhealthy. Now, let's go on to chapter 2. My child, again a reference to learning. My child, listen to what I say and treasure my commands. In other words, what I'm saying. Tune your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding. Cry out for insight and ask for understanding. Search for them as you would for silver. Seek them like hidden treasures. Then you will understand what it means to fear the Lord, and you will gain knowledge of God. For God grants wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He grants treasure. He grants a treasure of common sense to the honest. He is a shield to those who walk with integrity. There's another path word. That's about the third or the fourth time we've already found a word that relates to a reference to the path. So you can tell, if you go right from chapter 1 to where we are now, several times Solomon has already pointed out a particular path in life and going down that path in life and the decisions that are made along that path in life. And of course, he continues in verse 8 of chapter 2. He guards the paths, underline that, of the just and protects those who are faithful to him. Then you will understand what is right, what is just, what is fair. And verse 9 of chapter 2, you will find the right way to go. Underline that. That's another path word. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will fill you with joy. Wise choices will watch over you. Understanding will keep you safe. Wisdom will save you from evil people. The very example that Solomon began with is highlighted here. Wisdom will save you from evil people, from those whose words are twisted. Verse 13 of chapter 2. These men turn from the right way to walk down dark paths. Again, underline that, another path word. They take pleasure in doing wrong, and they enjoy the twisted ways of evil. Verse 15, their actions are crooked, and their ways are wrong. Another path word. So by now, we've got at least, I think I've counted at least 7 different references to a path in life. But that's not all. It gets even more. Listen carefully to chapter 2, verse 16. Wisdom will save you from the immoral woman, from the seductive words of the promiscuous woman. She has abandoned her husband and ignores the covenant she made before God. I'll explain that in just a bit. Entering her house leads to death. It is the road to the grave. Again, underline it, a path word. The man who visits her is doomed. He will never reach the paths of life. Underline it. So follow the steps of the good and stay on the paths of the righteous. 3 times in a row in 3 verses, 18, 19, and 20, path words. So that's roughly about 10 times right there. For only the godly will live in the land, and those with integrity will remain in it. But the wicked will be removed from the land, and the treacherous will be uprooted. So by the end of chapter 2, verse 22, which is the end of chapter 2, we've already had at least 10 references or direct references to a path in life, and to compare and contrast the 2 various paths of life. One is the path of the wise, the other is the path of the unwise, or the sinner, or the fool, or the mocker, or, as I'll explain in just a bit, this promiscuous woman, this seductive person, this immoral woman. And so then we get into chapter 3, verse 1. My child, never forget the things I have taught you. So already in chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's been a tremendous amount of teaching in terms of choosing a path in life, a path of success, and choosing a proper path of success. Store my commands in your heart. That is what I've said. If you will do this, you will live many years, and your life will be satisfying. That's God's definition of success. Never let loyalty and kindness leave you. Tie them around your neck as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Then you will find favor with both God and people, and you will earn a good reputation. Again, God's definition of success. God's definition of success is to live many years and to live a satisfying life, to find favor with God and people, and to earn a good reputation. See, none of those things have anything to do with the external standards or measures by which we measure success. Everything that Solomon has said, that God has revealed to Solomon, that God has inspired for us to understand, all of the measures of success in Proverbs 1 and 2 and moving into chapter 3 have to do with the internal person, who we are, our character, rather than the externals. And of course, then we get to the passage that is so familiar to us. Here's the formula. Here's sort of the bottom line. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. So that's the 11th reference to path. So if you go through Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, at least 11 times in those verses, you will discover Solomon telling us something about a path and learning how to choose which path to take in life and what constitutes a successful path as opposed to an unsuccessful path. So how do we walk this straight path? Let's unpack those three elements that make for a straight path. Let's unpack them a little bit this afternoon. So the first one is trust the Lord with all of your heart. We need to remember that life decisions begin somewhere. Now, when we hear the word heart, we think of the emotional, the subjective, the feeling side of our being. But I want to be able to tell you this afternoon that the Hebrew idea of the heart is considerably broader than you or I might think. The Hebrew idea of the heart includes all of who we are, our knowledge, our thinking, our reflection, our memory, our resolution, our determination, our conscience, our passions, our appetites, and our understandings. So when you think about the Hebrew idea of the heart, it's not just about the subjective feeling part of us, but it's about the thinking, the understanding part of us as well. It includes the whole person. Solomon is calling us to find our confidence, our sense of security concerning all of these areas in our life to the Lord and to what he has said. I want you to notice in the text that when Solomon says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, that word Lord is in all caps. What this does is it identifies the Lord as Yahweh, the one who freed Israel from bondage in Egypt, and the one who is the Father of our Lord Jesus. And this Yahweh, this God, this Lord, he's perfect and holy and sinless. He's all wise, all powerful. He's all truth and so much more, as the scriptures reveal of him. And that's why we can trust him. But let's ask that question, why should we trust him? Because his wisdom flows out of his character, and he gives true wisdom, true knowledge to those who trust him. As Solomon says in chapter 2, verse 7, he grants a treasure of common sense to the honest. Isn't that what we all need today, is common sense? And I love the way the New Living Translation expresses Proverbs chapter 2, verse 7. God gives a treasure of common sense to the honest. Wow, that's good to remember. So where do we find God's wisdom? Well, we find it in the same place that Israel found it, in God's revealed word. I always find it interesting and encouraging that God never leaves us to guess about who he is or some of the things that he does. God is a God who reveals himself to his people. And you go back to the Old Testament, and God was continually revealing himself to Adam and to Eve and to Abram and to Isaac and to Noah and to David and to all the folks, Israel, at Mount Sinai. God is continually revealing himself to his people, and he's always communicating with them. And one of the very definite ways in which he communicates with his people is he gets his people to write things down that he inspires of them. Okay? So it's God's inspiration in the life of the person who's writing the scriptures, and the person writes those things down, and that's God's communication to us. And so when we think about what God has said, we have a treasure trove, 66 books called the Bible, which is God's wisdom to us. And he really wants us to be able to find our wisdom in what he has said to us. When I think about this, I think about 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. We're very familiar with those passages. Let me read them for you here. Paul says to Timothy, all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. Well, really, if you think about it, you could tack Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, 6 to the end of 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, and that context would go together very, very well. So, trusting the Lord with all your heart is simply a matter of trusting all of who you are to the Lord who has revealed himself to us, and not to leave anything out. Let's give all of ourselves to God, and let's trust him with all of us. Now, if you go back to chapter 1, verses 10 to 19 in Proverbs, and the story of the sinners laying a trap for the innocent, whose wisdom would you trust? Would you trust the wisdom of the sinner, or would you trust the wisdom of the Lord? Well, the advantage that we have as modern Bible readers is that we have Solomon's example of teaching a child how to discern the difference between doing something the right way and something the wrong way. And obviously, we would say, no, we're not going to go down that path with the sinners. Well, that's easier said than done, because sometimes the way these kinds of people lay things out for us sounds very, very enticing. And so it takes wisdom to discern. And that's what Solomon offers us in the Proverbs. You see, the Lord's wisdom leads to a long and satisfying life. The sinner's wisdom leads to death and destruction. See, the sinners obviously think that they're on the path to success. They have the formula to success. And their formula is, let's ambush, let's lie in wait, let's rob and steal and kill. Because look at all of the stuff that we're going to get. And you can share it with us. But that's not the path to success, is it, friends? What kind of people have these people become? That's really the question of success that God is looking at. What kind of people have they become along the way, and what is their end? That's always the thing that we need to consider. And so trust in the Lord with all of your heart. And then he says, don't lean on your own understanding. Solomon warns us about relying purely on our own understanding. The reason is that we're often quite influenced by others around us in our decision making. The question is, do I trust the Lord for my sense of understanding, or do I trust myself? Well, from chapter 1 and chapter 2, it becomes easy to see the difference, doesn't it? Because we're created creatures, and especially because of Genesis 3, and the fact we're sin-broken creatures, it's easy to see by example of the sinners in chapter 1, verses 10 to 19, that we don't really understand what is best for us. See, very often we think we know what is best for us, and we really don't care what other people think. We know what's best. Nobody else can tell us what to do. Well, that's often, friends, where we can get into trouble. That's why we're not supposed to rely on our own understanding. We obviously don't know what is best for us. God does, but we don't. And as you can again plainly see by the example of the sinners in chapter 1, verses 10 to 19, we don't really know what is best for us. And our way of thinking can harm others and ourselves. And so it's good to go to a place where you can get true wisdom, and that's what God offers us in the Proverbs. And throughout Proverbs 1 and 2, God provides examples of a variety of influences that can harm us, in addition to the sinners, folks like simpletons and mockers and fools. And of course, there's this immoral woman who's abandoning God's covenant. Now, I just want to remind you here that this is a reference to Israel, who has turned their back on God's truth. His wisdom was given in the law, but they chose their own understanding over against what God's wisdom had to tell them. In fact, right in the very beginning of Judges, it reminds us that when Caleb and Joshua and all of the leaders of that generation that took Israel into the promised land, all of these leaders passed off of the scene, and underneath them grew a generation of folks, of leaders who did not know the Lord. Now, it doesn't mean that they were ignorant of the Lord. They knew who the Lord was. The stories were there. What they chose to do was turn their back on the Lord in favor of their own understanding. And of course, the book of Judges gives us that very long and sad story of how their own understanding led them into trouble time and time and time and time again. Israel in Judges did not find success in life. What they found was continual misery and judgment. It's only the graciousness and the goodness and the mercy of God that again rescues them time and time and time again and offers them wisdom to walk by, but they don't seem to learn very easily, or sometimes it seems at all. And so we're not to lean on our own understanding, but we're to trust what God has said with all of our heart, and not to lean on our own understanding. When I think about these things, the clearest example I can give you is Eve in Genesis 3, when the serpent tempted her to cut a corner. God had clearly spoken his wisdom and his truth concerning the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But right now I'm doing a bit of a personal study in Genesis 1 and 2. And I'm very intrigued by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And it's interesting in the creation story how God says to Adam and Eve, you know, this tree of life, you can eat from it anytime you want. That's absolutely clear. You can enjoy that fruit all day, night long, and it's up to you. However, there's this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Leave that one alone. That belongs to me. That's not to be part of your experience. And yet, of course, we know in Genesis 3 that the serpent comes along and he tempts Eve to eat of that fruit. And right at that particular juncture, Eve had a decision to make down the path that she was going, didn't she? What she had to do was make a decision between, do I trust what God has said, eat of the tree of life, but not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or do I trust my own understanding? And of course, the evil one, the sinner, the enticer, came along and encouraged her to move down a different path than God had for her. And of course, we know the outcome of that story. Instead of trusting God as she should have, and of course Adam should have, Eve trusted her own understanding, and she and Adam unleashed a world of hurt through the decisions that were made. They achieved success. They did begin to understand the difference between good and evil, but the cost of that success was incredibly high and harmful. Look at all the people around them that died, including their own children. Look what Cain did to Abel. They gained the knowledge of good and evil, but what was the cost? What kind of people did they become? You see, every decision we make going down a particular path comes with a cost. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is asking us to count the cost. And how often does this story not play itself out in our lives today? So, what Solomon tells us is to trust the Lord. Trust what he has said with all of your heart, with all of you. Don't leave anything to chance. Don't rely on your own understanding. Don't assume that you know what is best for you. God is there. His wisdom is there to help us. All we need to do is access it, and he's very willing to help us. And then it says, the third point, in all your ways, in all your paths, acknowledge him. This sentence has the same force behind it as trust the Lord with all your heart. The idea of acknowledge here includes confessing, admitting, perception, and an awareness of something. Solomon is calling us to make sure that we move down a particular path in life towards success. As we do that, we're fully conscious of taking God down that path with us and letting his wisdom lead us. I like to think about it this way. We're not to let our need of him fade into the background of our life, but rather as we move down a particular path in life, what God wants us to do is lock arms with him and travel down that path together, with him leading us with his wisdom. And as we do these things, there's a promise that he has for us. He will make our paths straight. In other words, we're going to find success in life. As we trust God with every fiber of our being and not leaning on our own understanding, but in all of our ways acknowledging him, he will give our life's path a level of success that isn't measured by the external end product like wealth or prominence in society. It's the success of character, filled with doing what is right, what is just, what is fair, just like Proverbs 1 and 2 tells us. That's the thing that God is looking for. A life that finds favor with God and people. In the end, as Proverbs says, a life that is satisfying. Can there be any greater success in life than this? As we conclude this afternoon, I want you to think about this. Down every path in life, and at every fork on that path, there are two people who sit and call to us to heed their words so that we can find success in life. And I found an illustration in Proverbs chapter 9, verses 13 to 18, which I want to bring to your attention because it just says it so well. Proverbs 9, verses 13 to 18 says, the woman of folly. Now, this would be an example of someone who is very unwise. The woman of folly is boisterous. Her voice is loud. It's appealing. It's calling to us. She's boisterous. She is naive and knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house on the seat of the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks understanding, she says, stolen water is sweet. The bread eaten in secret is pleasant. See, there's her formula for success. Darkness, secretiveness, stealing. And of course, Proverbs is telling us, don't listen to her. And here's why. But he doesn't know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Again, just like Proverbs 1 and 2, there is a call to wisdom, a call to recognize what these people are like and to stay away from them, rather to walk a straight path in life. But there is another person on this particular path calling out to us. It's God's voice of wisdom. Over against the example of this boisterous woman is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Again, very simply, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. When the boisterous woman calls, don't listen to her. Trust the Lord with all of your heart. That is, with all of your passions, your understanding, your thinking, your whatever makes you up, trust the Lord with all of who you are. And don't lean on your own understanding. Don't think that you know how to discern what this boisterous woman is saying. Be very, very careful. In all your ways acknowledge him. Lock your arms with God, not with this boisterous woman. And he will make your path straight. He will make you successful. I find the book of Proverbs very, very encouraging in these days. And it's a book that I find myself visiting more and more and more. And I would encourage you to do the same. And if you're interested in chatting about the book of Proverbs, I would be very open to doing that with you. So please feel free to maybe give me a call, and we can talk about those things in the days to come. So once again, as we conclude this afternoon, simply want to remind you that this weekend is the EMMC gathering in Saskatoon. Go to emmc.ca and you can find the link in information there, and you can join the workshops, the live streams, whatever they have to offer on the weekend will be there for you to enjoy. So please remember that. And also, please remember to pray for Esther Fair and her family, as we all in the EMMC and all of their friends and family mourn their loss of Benny, a dearly loved colleague and friend, and one whom we will miss very, very much. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure being with you. We pray that the rest of your day is going to go well and that you will enjoy the presence of God today. We'll talk to you again shortly. Have a great day. Bye-bye.